What's up everyone? We got a slightly different camera angle today because today is a special day. And it's a special day because we're finally going to start talking about what the hell I'm actually building. And what am I actually building? Well, I'll just tell you flat out. It's a custom hypermedia system that is backed by a content management system. And to your ears, that might sound difficult to understand. And frankly, it is kind of difficult to understand. So this video is going to be all about everything that you need to know surrounding this concept so that you got a good grasp on it and that you can see the beauty and the power and the flexibility in what this thing actually is. This video is going to have three main sections. And in the first one, we're going to talk about Hypermedia Systems. It's a book by Carson Gross. In the second, we're going to look at a hypermedia system that is not browser-based. And the third is that we're going to take a little trip down memory lane. You can see I've got all these old Macs out here. And I'm going to show you how Apple has been one of the best custodians of hypermedia systems over the course of the last couple of decades. I'll be fully upfront that this is the second time I've tried to record this video. It's very dense, it's difficult to navigate, but it's going to be a great one, so strap in and let's get started. What is a hypermedia system? If that sounds obtuse to you, it's understandable because it's mostly technical jargon. I didn't even have the lexicon to understand what I was dealing with or what I was saying until I came across Hypermedia Systems. It's a book by Carson Gross and it's free, it's online. All you got to do is just go to hypermedia.systems in your browser and you can read it as a PDF or as web pages. I think I bought the book through Kindle because I just want to support the guy. It's an excellent book and an excellent resource for understanding the concept behind this and also a little bit of the history behind this too. So what's actually in this book? It's kind of a mix of historical context. It's kind of a mix of conceptual stuff. And it's a little bit preachy about, lamenting how we're abusing the biggest hypermedia system or the most important hypermedia system we've ever had, the internet, the web browser. And it also is an overview of HTMX, and then there's like a second section about something called Hyperview, which we can get into at a later date. But there's a couple of main ideas that you want to take away from this book, or that I took away from this book, and I hope I'm not misrepresenting Carson Gross's work. Like, definitely read this for yourself. But the biggest things about a hypermedia system, the characteristics, the traits of a hypermedia system are, firstly, that the state, the application state, is going to be ejected out to the server. This is in contrast with your typical native application or a SPA or a PWA application that sits in your browser. In those cases, a lot of the state is going to be held locally. It could be in memory. It could also be files on disk or a database that's on the system somewhere. All that stuff is ejected out to the server. The client application that you see in front of your face on your phone or on your desktop computer is really just a presenter. It doesn't do any of the computing. It doesn't hold the variables in the state or anything. It's just a presenter. It's just showing you what the state is on the server. And if I were to come up with a metaphor that could serve as an interaction style between the client and the server, it's almost like you're taking a photo of whatever, or like a snapshot of whatever the state is on the server, and you're sending that little Polaroid back to a client to be presented in front of the client, in front of the user, I guess I should say. So you can almost think of it like snapshot what's on the server, take that, send that little Polaroid back to the user and whatever, and it's right there in their face. And you can, now the internet is magical. Hypermedia clients are magical because you can interact with it. It's a little bit more interactive than just a Polaroid photo. But you can think of it like that, like you're taking snapshots of state on the server and presenting it to the user. And you're not holding that state locally on the computer. So that's one key feature of a hypermedia system. The next most important thing is the response that you get back from the server. And how it's constructed. So this differs, it seems obvious, kind of, but it differs from how most web application developers are approaching web development today. So in a hypermedia system, when it's being used properly, you've got structure and content intertwined with each other. And then you've got navigation intertwined with all of with the other two of those things. So you've got structure, content, and navigation coming back in one response. Now, if you've never developed applications before, you're probably saying, so what? But if you have developed applications before, specifically spas or a native application or whatever, you know that the navigation of the application, when you're drilling down through lists and menus and things like that, all of that stuff is almost always hard-coded. So if you want the user to go to a view to manage their account or whatever, manage their profile, you're hard-coding that button or that link to send the user there. Now, that's not inherently horrible. It's a perfectly valid design choice, but it's not what we do in hypermedia systems. The most important differentiator of a hypermedia system is what we call a uniform interface, or at least what Carson Gross calls a uniform interface. And what uniform interface means is essentially that nothing is hard-coded. The response coming back from the server can change at any time. So that link to the user's profile or whatever that we talked about, that could not be there. Or that could be there, or there could be additional links, or that link could go to a different profile page because the user has a different account type. Something along those lines, right? So it's a uniform interface, and the client, the presenter, doesn't care. It doesn't care because nothing's been hard-coded into the application. So it's probably still difficult to understand why any of that's important. But there's a couple of key benefits, and again, these are benefits of a proper hypermedia system, in that it helps improve application maintainability, and it's very easy to evolve things over time. So for example, in a traditional like thick client native application, you're reaching out to some data API. It could be serving you JSON, it could be RPCs, it could be whatever, right? It could be any of those. It could be XML. If the structure of that response changes, you have to version the API, otherwise you risk breaking the client. In this case, since the client is just a dumb presenter and it's not expecting any particular structure, you're free to change that response in whatever way you want to at any point you want to, and you don't have to worry about versioning anything. So the threat of any kind of breaking changes is reduced. The threshold for evolving an application and being able to do so without introducing bugs or issues or whatever, breaking changes, right, to the user and having them see that is much, much lower. There's a lot more to all of this that's in the book, but those are the high-level concepts that I want you to understand about a hypermedia system as we get into and as we start talking about what I'm building. So the hypermedia system that I'm building, I think I mentioned it before, it's not browser-based at all. And I'm hardly the first person to do this or attempt this, but I am the first person to build one of these custom hypermedia systems that's not browser-based and to back it by a content management system. If you've never done web development before inside of a creative agency or anything like that, you're probably like, what the hell is a content management system? There's a content management system that I use and that I specialize in called Umbraco CMS. If you've seen any of my other videos, you probably have heard me mention this before. Yes, it's a weird name. It's because it was built and developed in Denmark, and a lot of their words are going to seem weird to us. Sorry to anyone in Denmark watching this, but yes, your words are weird to us. Just a quick getting you up to speed on what Umbraco CMS is. It's a content management system. It's built on ASP.NET. It's open source, and it's really great and easy to use for creating custom websites. I'm almost guaranteed that none of you have ever seen Umbraco before, or even if you've seen a content management system before. So I'm going to dive into that, and I'm going to show you exactly what Umbraco is. We're going to go into what they call the back office, which is like an admin panel. All right, to talk about content management systems, I have brought out my orange M4 iMac, which is my daily driver, and is also absolutely the most modern machine out of the entire spread here. We need a modern machine because we need a modern browser so that I can actually open up the TLS connection to the server that this site is running on. Okay, so I'm going to show you a site that I've built on top of Umbraco, and then we're going to log in and I'm going to show you what Umbraco calls the back office, which is kind of like an admin panel for managing all of the content, the images, the text, everything on the website. Okay, let's go ahead and open up a website that I built on top of Umbraco. If you've seen one of my older videos, you already know what this is, but this is tideless.com, and it's kind of like a website for, I don't know, water sports people, e-foilers, to go and find spots to ride at and stuff like that. And it's fairly information rich of a website. So you can see we've got this location guide here. We've got locations with a bunch of textual content, a bunch of image content. And managing all of this content is really a job that's best suited for what is called a content management system. A CMS is great because it allows you to dynamically update content inside of a website without having to actually manually edit HTML files or anything like that. So you can have, for example, lists of information. In this case, I've made a filterable grid, and you can click on each, shop here and again, find a whole bunch of text content, images, and whatever that would be most easily managed by a content management system. You can also just have straight up marketing pages or whatever. There don't have to be lists of content or grids of content for it to make sense for you to put this on top of a content management system. So now we have a little tour of the site. We know what we're working with. What does it look like to manage all of this stuff? Well, I am going to go and log into the back end. All right, we have logged into what Umbraco calls the back office. This is kind of like an admin panel for creating and updating content on the site. We're currently in the content section, and we have this tree here, this content tree here on the left-hand side. This shows us all of the content nodes which represent pages on the website. So for example, if we want to open up that location guide that we were looking at earlier. So in this case, I've broken the location guide down by city, and from there, we can open these up and find actual riding spots in here. Now, this is great, so we can easily manage the structure of the site, right? But it gets even better because if you wanted to update some content about, say, Pensacola Beach, you simply click on that node, and now you've got all these nice, rich text editors. You've got the ability to choose media out of a gallery, and you're doing all this stuff without having to program anything. It just makes sites so maintainable and so easy to construct, especially for people who are not developers and are not particularly technical. And then you have even more stuff. So I'm going to discard those changes. You have even more stuff here, right? So there's all those shops that we had published out on the front end side. And again, you can go in and edit any of the content inside of there very easily and save and publish, and then just like that, it's live. And then you saw the eFoil training page. Well, Umbraco is pretty cool because it allows you to build grids of content. So this is what they call the block grid editor. And if I wanted to add a new video or something to that page, I could easily just go in here, and this is the same video, and come up with the headline. Let's go ride, and hit create, save and publish, and then let's go actually preview that change. There it is. This wasn't on the page before. You guys have to trust me, it wasn't on the page before. So editing, updating any of the content inside of a content management system, extremely easy. All you have to do is just log in. And another thing I really love about Umbraco is that everything is so flexible and powerful. You can literally get this CMS to build anything you want. So for example, if I wanted to create a new page type, I come into settings, open up document types, and hit document type with template. So we could call this, I don't know, let's call this video gallery, right? And then let's say that we wanted to give, I'll name this section here. I'll just name it content. Let's say that we wanted to have like some description text about what our video gallery is about. So I'll just write description text. I'll give it a name. I'll give it a property editor, and I'm going to choose rich text tip tap. Hit save. Let's say that we want to give this page a special headline as well. So we can write headline, and we can give this a text box. Hit submit. We can reorder the way that these are presented. I'm done reordering. Let's save. All right, one thing that we've got to do before we can actually use this is add this to the structure of homepage. And so what this does is this allows us to create video guide pages underneath the homepage. So I'm going to hit choose on that, hit save. And so if we come back to the content tab, now under our homepage, we've got video gallery here. And we can create a video gallery page that easy. I want to make it that easy for you as a developer to be able to add new interfaces, new views, new widgets to your existing applications, whether they're mobile or they're desktop or whatever. And I'm doing this using the power of Hypermedia. So all of the changes that you make inside of what I'm building don't break your applications, and you can change things on the fly without having to recompile anything, without having to ship a new version up to the App Store. I already admitted that I am hardly the first person to have built a hypermedia system. This idea goes back to the 90s, and some would argue it goes back even further. So it begs the question of who else has built hypermedia systems. And I would argue that Apple has been the best custodian and the best chaperone of hypermedia systems throughout the last couple of decades. The reason why I say that is particularly because of what they've done on the Apple TV. Now at present, there's two ways to develop applications for the Apple TV. There's a typical SDK that is based essentially off of the iOS SDK, TV Kit. And then there's a second way, and this is now deprecated, called TVML, or TV Markup Language. And we're going to be talking about the deprecated one. We're going to be talking about TVML. Before the tvOS SDK came out, people were developing applications for Apple TV as a platform using something called TVML. And as I said, that stands for TV Markup Language. What it is essentially is a custom flavor of XML that your server can serve out, and the Apple TV as a client will present it. Now things are hopefully starting to look a little familiar. The server is generating XML, the client is taking a little snapshot of that and presenting it to the user. And as the user is navigating through the structure of whatever the TV application is, the client, the Apple TV box, is going out and fetching new content from URLs, and again, the client's then taking a snapshot of it and presenting it to the user with a whole new set of images, text, video, media, and links. So we're getting back to this uniform interface system that we're talking about. Like, you can't really break a TVML application because whatever you change the navigation to and all that, like, there's no versioned API here. So if you update the server view and you change the navigation, the Apple TV doesn't care. It just shows whatever links that you've changed it to. There's no coding changes in an application to build and publish and put onto the App Store or anything like that. It's all handled by your server. The state is ejected to your server. The TVML app doesn't have a database inside of it. It doesn't have local storage. It doesn't have variables or whatever. I mean, there's a technicality there, and you can get me on it if you want to, but I'm gonna just keep it simple by saying there's no local state inside of TVML apps. It's ejected out to the server. And so it's a very, very beautiful, very powerful thing. And I hate that Apple deprecated it, but now it just means that I'm going to pick up the slack. And so I want to show you how this all worked. And I think when you see the TVML, you're going to really start to see the brilliance of Hypermedia Systems, and then also of what I'm doing and what I'm building as a SaaS platform. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just do a search for Apple TV TVML. And it's going to pull up a search page. Yeah, see right here, migrate your TVML app to Swift UI. Blah! We don't want that. Screw that. But we're going to look at some of this deprecated documentation here, right? See, it says it's deprecated in tvOS 18. So like 2-ish years ago, they deprecated it. And if we scroll down this page, you can see that we have all these page templates, right? We have all these page templates. And these page templates are essentially what your server will generate and fill in and what the client is going to snapshot and present. So if you look at this, we've got alert template, we've got form template, we've got list template, right? We've got main template, whatever. Let's click on list template just to get an idea of what this is. And this page is beautiful. This page is beautiful. This is going to explain everything. All right. So you can see that we've got this graphic here, and I'm so happy there's a graphic here. You can see that we've got this graphic here, and it's got all these different areas inside of it. And this represents all the different areas that come through as a part of the XML payload. So you essentially on your server write a template or whatever, you generate this output, this XML output, and you fill it in with whatever images, text, media, video, whatever, right? Links that you want to display to the user when they're using the Apple TV app. And it will render it into this interface, and it will render it using native Apple TV controls. There's no web browser on the Apple TV. These are native controls inside of there. So there's no lag or anything like that. Very high quality, high fidelity interfaces. And you didn't write any Swift or Objective-C code to do it. So you can imagine that if we pair something like this up with something like Umbraco's back office, how powerful of a combination that could be when you're building and developing applications, specifically parts of an application that are heavy on content, heavy on imagery, and don't really need local state. So this could be as simple as like legal text on a legal page that you have to embed in an app and then periodically update. Or it could be something like a list in an iOS application. Or it could be an NS table view inside of an AppKit application on your desktop Mac. And you'd be able to update that interface element, that NS table view, just by using a web browser remotely on the fly. You could update the contents inside of that table view on the fly. You could theoretically pull in data sources from other places and feed them into my custom hypermedia system and have your application update on the fly. And again, because it's a hypermedia system, there's no breaking changes. You don't have to version any APIs or anything like that to get this done. So again, I'm building a custom hypermedia system on top of a content management system. Or I think I'm finally ready to use a layman's term. I am building server-driven interfaces that you can embed into your existing applications. All right, now for a trip down memory lane. And the reason I want to do this is just to demonstrate how Apple has kind of been the unsung champion, the unsung hero of hypermedia systems over the last couple of decades. Behind me here, I have a PowerMac G3 blue and white from 1999. This is a 350 megahertz model, and I've got macOS 8.6 server loaded up on it. And the reason I've got such an old machine out is because we can start to see some of the first inclinations of a hypermedia system that is not a browser in this version of macOS. And I want to say for clarity, the Sherlock search service did originate in macOS 8.5. but I have 8.6 on here and I'm not going to wipe it out because 8.6 is better anyways. We all know that. So to understand where we're coming from, you have to place yourself back in the 1998 or 1999 time frame. And this is a time before Google existed. So if you're on the internet and you're searching for things, like search engines like Google, where they're crawling websites, those didn't exist yet. It's crazy to think about, but they really didn't exist. And so you had link directories like Yahoo, where you would have like links of websites and whatever, and they would be categorized. And there's this whole hierarchical structure based on categories, and you would just keep clicking through category and drilling down and down and down until you found found websites that were approximately about the topic you were looking for. Now at that same time, Apple had this, I don't know, kind of crazy innovative idea to build something called Sherlock. And what Sherlock would do would aggregate search results across a bunch of different websites and present them in one interface. For example, if you had a collection of, you can imagine a collection of websites, and each website might have their own little search box on it or whatever. Sherlock would go out and hit that search box and pull back whatever the search results were and display them in one unified interface. And it would do this across a whole bunch of sites. So let me show you what that actually looks like. And I'm gonna flip the camera around. All right, we got a nice view of this macOS 8.6 computer screen. And yes, this is a Blueberry Studio display. I am very proud of finding one of these. Very difficult, maybe one of the most difficult pieces of hardware I've ever tried to find. But back to the task at hand. So back in macOS 8.5 and macOS 8.6, the original Find menu was replaced with a upgraded Sherlock application. And if you've seen System 7 or earlier versions of macOS 8, this looks pretty similar at first glance to the original Find dialog. But they added some additional features in here. They added this tabbed interface that allowed you to find words and phrases inside of content on your hard disk. And then they also added this search internet feature. So you can see we've got a list of a bunch of different websites that you could activate or deactivate by checking the box. And then you could type a search term like, let's say, eFoil inside of there, and your computer would go out and connect to all of these different websites that you have checked here, and it would attempt to send the term eFoil to them, and it would get the results back, which actually came back as HTML, and it would parse them out and display them in one unified interface. So obviously this doesn't work anymore. I mean, geez, I don't even know if Alta Vista actually exists at this point. Or Excite or GoTo.com or Hotbot, or Lycos, geez. So this isn't going to work anyway, but that's how it would have worked if you were using macOS 8.6 in 1999. All right, moving on. This is my PowerMac G4 Cube. This is a 450 megahertz model, and it's got a gigabyte of RAM in there, and I've got macOS 9.2 installed on this computer. And the reason I'm including this computer is because macOS 9.2 had an upgraded Sherlock application, Sherlock 2, that busted out of just being a replacement for the Find file dialog in earlier versions of macOS into its own application. The highlight feature of Sherlock version 2 is that it allowed web developers to create Sherlock plugins which would be able to connect to and parse the search results from their own websites. All right, so here we are on macOS 9.2, and now instead of just going to the File Find menu on the Finder, Sherlock has been ejected into its own little application with its own icon. And you can see we're now working with like a proper application interface. Like this is its own little application. And you can also see the very first hints of brushed metal styling that would later come into more widespread usage in macOS 10. If we look across the top of the application here, we can see a bunch of different channels. And these were essentially like groups that would allow you to kind of target your search results a little bit more. So they grouped categories of sites together. So for example, shopping or news, or if you wanted, information from Apple's support online support documents or reference or whatever, you could now drill down by category and send search queries to that entire category. Sherlock 2 also had support for LDAP, so if you were in a corporate environment, you could connect Sherlock to your organization's LDAP server and be able to look up information about people and whatever and just pull it live from the directory. Now, how Sherlock 2 plugins essentially work is fairly basic. You're essentially just creating a file with the right file extension on it, and the file is kind of like a config file. You tell it what URL to go and hit, and then you give it a couple of options to basically parse. It's almost like a very rudimentary X query if you've used XML before. How to parse actual HTML markup so that Sherlock can get at like things like the page title and relevancy and also maybe a description about what the page is about. I don't think images, but I could be wrong on that. But it would just basically parse, send out a web request, get the HTML markup, and then parse it and display it in a unified interface. All right, the final stop down our little memory lane is going to be this 24-inch Intel Core 2 Duo iMac. This is a late 2006 model. This is the only white plastic 24-inch iMac that ever existed. And I've got this machine running Tiger. I was able to find the original restore disks on Macintosh Garden and flash them to a flash drive and restore this machine to its original state. And the reason having 10.4 installed on this computer is important is because it is the last version of Mac OS X to have Sherlock version 3. So Sherlock 3 was introduced in Mac OS 10.2 Jaguar, lived on through 10.3 and into 10.4. And after 10.4, Apple just completely removed the application and forgot it ever existed. But it's actually a pretty cool application if you know what it was, if you look into how it worked. Before I put this box down, I want to stress that Sherlock 3 was a highlight feature of 10.2. I mean, they made a nice big deal about it. They featured it prominently on the product's marketing imagery. They have a little blurb about it over here. It says, Sherlock brings the internet to you the way you'd like to see it, with a personalized view of the things you use the most, like stock quotes, maps, restaurants, and more. And so how did they bring all of that personalized content that I would want to use the most to me? They brought it to me using a Hypermedia system. Now, I remember using Sherlock on these earlier versions of Mac OS, and it was pretty cool. It was a neat idea. I couldn't believe that I was accessing web services like eBay and whatever, and I was doing it not through a browser, but through like native Aqua controls. And back then, those native Aqua controls from this era were just mind-blowing. They were so cool. They were beautiful. The interface was laid out in just a very logical, nice way, and it really shocked me that like somebody did this. Like somebody programmed a website into a native Mac application, and how cool that was. Little did I know, even though I've been thinking about it ever since then, that what that was is essentially a hypermedia system. All right, so flipping this around so you can actually see the iMac screen, I'm gonna go ahead and go to the applications folder, and we're gonna open up Sherlock. Now what you're seeing here is Sherlock 3. Unfortunately, all of the channels that used to go along this top shelf here are no longer in existence. Again, these would have been loaded dynamically off of Apple's web servers or off of developers' web servers. And at this point in 2025, these are all gone. They're not being hosted anywhere. So Sherlock 3 today is not very useful, and I can't really demo it to you. Outside of just clicking around through a couple of menus and such. I wonder what's in preferences. Oh, apparently you could store cookies. But Sherlock 3 wasn't the only game in town. There was another application out at around the same time called Watson, which, funny enough. And this basically did the same thing. This was built by a third-party developer, and this came out after Sherlock 2, but before Sherlock 3. And this essentially did the same thing. It would connect to websites, it would parse, and this is also more functional too. It would parse the output and it would display them in interfaces in kind of a hypermedia style. Now, none of this, I don't think this would work at all if I actually type something in there. Yeah, see, it's unable to connect to server, probably just because it can't understand contemporary TLS connections. But you were able to connect to a bunch of different websites, and other developers could, so for example, was a cookbook? Oh, cool. Other developers could also add, I don't know if they call them channels or whatever, but you could add other things to, you could add other functionality to your Watson application, and theoretically it would just keep growing and growing. Now, the duplicated functionality between Watson and Sherlock caused some bad blood between developers and Apple itself. And there's lasting wounds, lasting scars from this battle that we still live with today. So if you've ever heard the term Sherlocking, particularly in the context of Apple, like, Apple's Sherlocking this, it means that a third-party developer created a cool and successful application, and Apple decided that they wanted to clone it. So Apple just cloned it and shipped it as a part of the core operating system, basically kind of ruining the business and the appeal of whatever the third-party developer built. So Apple is essentially usurping third-party developers. And there's been several instances of this ever since 2002, and the legend has never died. So why do I consider Sherlock 3 a hypermedia system of sorts? Well, it was a huge departure from Sherlock version 2. I mean, this is like a completely different application. It's really Sherlock in name only, and really it's the way it works. It's kind of weird and quirky in only a way that Apple would think of, but there's also a beauty to it, which again is a very Apple-like quality. And so how it would work is developers would use Xcode to create Sherlock channels. And these channels consisted of a nib file, which if you're a developer, especially an older developer on Apple's platforms, you know that that's an interface file. So you can essentially drag and drop buttons and text fields and labels and other controls and stuff like that into a little window representation, and that's your interface. That's your layout of your interface. Now, the other features of a Sherlock channel is that there were some configuration files so that the channel would know how to display itself inside of the application, and also how to connect to your server, like what the web address was. In addition to that, there was some stuff that you could do to go through and parse the output and the markup and help it fill in that zib interface that you defined. And Xcode would package this up into one little entity, one file. And it's almost like zipping a file, doing a zip archive of a bunch of different files into one file. And you would take this archive and you would toss it up onto your own web server. And Sherlock 3 would connect to your own web server and pull in information. It would pull in the interface. It would pull in all of the data that you've embedded into this thing, and it would also pull in code so that you could parse dynamic sources of data too. All right, I have absolutely no idea how long this video is going to be. I'm going to try and edit it down to be as short as possible. But that's the overall introduction to hypermedia systems. That's the introduction to content management systems. That's the introduction to the thoughts and the theory behind what I'm building. I'm taking all of this and I'm turning it into a turnkey SaaS product that you as a developer will be able to use and integrate. Just walk up and integrate it into your existing applications very easily, very affordably, very efficiently. And finally, we also had a little trip down memory lane. I hope you enjoyed that. Some of the Mac geeks out there who aren't developers, hopefully, that made this video worthwhile. And finally, I hope all of you are excited about what I'm building, excited about these possibilities. Next week, I'm going to actually show you what I'm building working. I just hit a huge milestone last night, and which is why I'm a little bit tired in this video, but it's another story. But that's coming up next week, so stay tuned. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, definitely subscribe to the channel. If you thought any of this content was cool, informative, hit the thumbs up. Drop me a comment and let me know what you think about all of this. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one.